So, let's see how PlayStation evolved over the years and revolutionized the gaming industry. This is the evolution of PlayStation. As huge as Sony's PlayStation is nowadays, it may not have existed at all if it weren't for the decision of another gaming giant, Nintendo. That's because originally Sony were reluctant to build their own gaming machine and instead worked with other companies, like Nintendo, to create add-ons for existing products. For example, in 1988, Sony helped to build a CD-ROM version of Nintendo's hugely popular SNES. The resulting console was unveiled in 1991 and was called the PlayStation. However, just one day after its announcement, Nintendo broke its partnership deal with Sony and opted to team up with Philips instead. Sony's president, Norio Oga, was furious in response to this rejection and tasked Ken Kutaragi with developing the PlayStation into a machine that would compete with Nintendo's. In December 1994, the new PlayStation was born. Released in Japan to begin with, the console was a roaring success and would be distributed to a worldwide audience 1 year later. It cost $299 at launch and went on to become the first game console in history to sell more than 100 million units. The PlayStation's main advantage over the competition was that it used CDs for all of its games, as opposed to the heavy use of cartridges at the time. Whereas a cartridge could store maybe 12 to 15 megabytes of data, developers using CD could store up to 650 megabytes. A memory card containing 128 kilobytes of storage was required to save your game progress. The PlayStation's superior specifications meant better graphics and an overall improved gameplay experience. As a result, established franchises like Final Fantasy actually switched from Nintendo to PlayStation. Classic games like Ridge Racer, Crash Bandicoot, and Metal Gear Solid also attracted a wide audience and showcased the amazing performance of the console. As for PlayStation's best-selling game, the Gran Turismo. Gran Turismo was incredibly difficult to develop. Game designer Kazunori Yamachi said, quote, "It took 5 years. In those 5 years, it did not see yet. I woke up at work, still asleep at work. It was getting cold, so I knew it must be winter. I estimate I was home only 4 days a year." All the hard work resulted in groundbreaking graphics, and it is considered one of the greatest video games of all time. It was also a huge financial success, with over 10.9 million copies sold. Gran Turismo has become a huge series since its debut in 1997. The latest game in the series is Gran Turismo 7, which was released on March 4th, 2022. It's mind-blowing to see how much graphics have evolved in 25 years. Sony's machine was pretty impressive as a music CD player too. It played discs with great clarity, and as such, it served multiple uses, appealing to both families and older generations. This tradition of dual purpose would be seen in later versions of PlayStation, with the PS2 catering to DVDs and the PS3 serving as one of the cheapest Blu-ray players upon its release. Sony spent a long time making sure the PlayStation controller was comfortable and reflected the 3D aspect of its games, too. The increased thickness of the controller in comparison to other consoles of the era, and even the PlayStation's 3D logo design, were in reference to this. Clearly inspired by the controller used on Nintendo's NES system, the PlayStation controller added shoulder buttons to allow gamers more in-play options, plus handles for better grip. Rather than assigning letters to each button, the iconic square, triangle, circle, and cross symbols were introduced. What's more, these symbols actually mean something too. The triangle refers to a viewpoint, and the direction a player is headed. The square button indicates a piece of paper, acting as the game's menu, and the circle and X buttons mean yes and no, respectively, even though they are rarely used for their intended purposes in games nowadays. The shapes are still seen on modern controllers and are closely linked to PlayStation's brand image. Sony's attention to detail has always been impressive. To ensure their PlayStation controller wasn't too heavy, it was tested by gamers in all sorts of positions, including lying down. When it was released in North America, the controllers were made 10% larger than the ones used in Japan, because most Americans' hands were bigger than those of the Japanese. To give players a better range of motion in 3D environments, Sony created the dual analog controller in 1996, adding 2 analog sticks, which were revolutionary at the time. With the release of the new controller came 2 analog-capable titles, Tobal 2 and Bushido Blade. 1 year later, Sony introduced the DualShock controller, which featured rumble support. That meant that the dual analog controller could now vibrate, adding an extra dimension and increased immersiveness for gaming. The analog sticks were also given textured grips, longer handles, and improved shoulder buttons. Plus, you could press in the analog sticks to act as additional commands. PlayStation games that managed to take full advantage of these new features included Spyro the Dragon, Final Fantasy VIII, and Crash Bandicoot 3. Due to the success of the DualShock controller, it soon became the default controller for the PlayStation. In 2000, a smaller, rounder version of the PlayStation was released and was referred to as the PS1. In addition to its new, sleek design, it featured an updated graphical user interface, designed to make menu navigation easier. Despite the imminent arrival of the PlayStation 2 that same year, sales of the PS1, which cost only $99 at launch, were surprisingly high. Of the 102.49 million PlayStation units sold, 28.2 million were PS1s, featuring the newer design. Fun fact, father of the PlayStation hated Crash Bandicoot to begin with. He felt that the character was too immature, and the PlayStation should target a more mature audience. The former CEO of Sony soon came around, though, when he realized that everyone, including mature gamers, seemed to love Crash. The beloved Bandicoot served as PlayStation's official mascot up to the year 2000. Now, unless you're from Japan or you're a huge PlayStation enthusiast, chances are that you've probably never even heard of the Pocket Station. It was released exclusively in Japan in January 1999 as a peripheral to the original PlayStation home console. In addition to working as a memory card, it featured a monochrome LCD screen and worked as a standalone miniature handheld gaming device. It also had a real-time clock, built-in flash memory, infrared communication capability, and sound. The Pocket Station measured just 64 by 42 millimeters in height and width. It had a wide variety of games, with its best-selling title being Dakademo Iso, which sold over 1.5 million copies. Despite the handheld's relative obscurity outside of Japan, it proved insanely popular and sold over 5 million units there. The Pocket Station was discontinued in 2002, but was later revived in 2013 as an application for the PlayStation Vita, available through the Japanese PlayStation Store. The app allows users to play classic PlayStation games in a Pocket Station minigame format, which is pretty cool. To create these evolution videos, we do a lot of research by visiting all kinds of websites, but we never know if a site is safe or not. That's why I use NordVPN to keep me safe online. Nowadays, everything is online, so I think it's essential to keep our data and IP address safe. But that's not all. What I really love about NordVPN is that I can change my location instantly, watch series and movies on Netflix that I normally wouldn't be able to see. I can now watch all of the Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter movies, thanks to the magical powers of NordVPN. I feel like I'm a real wizard now. Thanks to NordVPN for sponsoring this video. If you go to nordvpn.com/flatline, you get a huge discount off the 2-year plan with 4 additional months for free. There's also a 30-day money-back guarantee, so why not just try it out and keep your data safe while you're like a wizard? Go to nordvpn.com/flatlife or click the link in the description. Riding on the back of the PlayStation's colossal success, The PlayStation 2, or PS2 for short, was released in the year 2000. It cost $299 at launch, which was the same launch price as the original PlayStation. While Sony's initial console was revolutionary, its successor was outstanding and solidified Sony's position as a permanent rival to Nintendo and later Microsoft in the years to come. The PS2 made a seamless transition from using CDs to DVDs, meaning it could be used to watch movies as well as play games, and allowed for online play with high-definition 3D visuals. Meanwhile, the PS2 memory card upped its capacity to 8 megabytes of storage. Much-loved franchises like Ratchet & Clank, God of War,
And Kratos cast himself from the highest mountain in all of Greece.
and Jak and Daxter found their feet with the PS2, while already popular series, such as Grand Theft Auto, saw a massive boost with the console's heightened power. For example, GTA 3 offered gamers a fully immersive, sandbox-style game in 3 dimensions for the first time. Multiple accessories were released for the PS2 with varying success. They included the iToy camera, SingStar microphones, and buzzers, all of which increased the levels of interaction players experienced, for a short while anyway. The controller was also updated with the introduction of the DualShock 2. Though it looked similar to the original, it weighed significantly less. The analog sticks were more robust, and the standard versions were black instead of gray to fit in with the PS2's darker color scheme. That the controller looked so similar to its predecessor was exceptional at the time. New consoles were expected to launch with entirely re-imaged controllers. If we look at Nintendo, we can see that the SNES had an entirely different controller compared to the Nintendo 64. And yet again, the GameCube came with a redesigned controller. The most notable upgrade, however, were the pressure-sensitive buttons, which could be used in racing games such as Gran Turismo to control the car's speed with more precision. This clever mechanic worked well for the PlayStation 2's best-selling game, Grand Theft Auto: San Andreas. The pressure sensitivity of the buttons could also be used for shooting and aiming mechanics, as seen in Metal Gear Solid 2, when a light button press resulted in the player holding up their gun without shooting. A slimmer, lighter PlayStation 2 console was released in 2014 with a starting price of $149. Known as the PS2 Slim, it was also quieter than the standard model and had a built-in Ethernet port. The design was trimmed further in future years, and this constant slimming of consoles would become tradition for later PlayStations in the series. Over the years, countless games were released, including Gran Turismo 4, Final Fantasy X, and Kingdom Hearts. While 2,500 games have been released for the PlayStation 3, 3,200 games for the PlayStation 4, and about 500 games so far for the PlayStation 5, for the PlayStation release of the PlayStation 2, an internet myth circulated online that suggested Saddam Hussein had purchased 4,000 PS2s for use as a supercomputer, which was allegedly to be used as a weapon of mass destruction. Despite both Sony and the U.S. Customs Service claiming there was no evidence of any such shipment of PS2s to Iraq, the rumor persisted, and it wasn't completely unfounded. Experts suggested that the PS2 processors could be combined to form a mighty powerful computer capable of executing at least 1.2 trillion instructions per second, which would be enough juice to simulate nuclear detonation. PlayStation 2. It featured software for video, photo, and audio editing, while also supporting online game capability using an internal broadband adapter. This meant that games using the PS2 hard disk drive were also supported. Interestingly, the PSX was the first product released by Sony under the PlayStation brand that did not include a controller with the device itself. It was also the first to use the cross-media bar, which could transfer videos and music via USB to other systems like the PlayStation Portable. Speaking of which, Sony's first serious attempt at a handheld gaming console was the PlayStation Portable, or PSP for short. It was released in December 2004 in Japan and in 2005 everywhere else. The introductory price in the US was $249. The PSP was up against some tough opposition from the start though, as it was competing with Nintendo's very popular DS console. Nintendo had already firmly established themselves in the handheld market by this point, meaning Sony had some catching up to do. One feature that set the PSP apart was that it was the first to use the optical storage medium known as the Universal Media Disc. This meant that it could store both games and movies. The advanced graphics capabilities were also what made the PSP stand out. Players could connect to their PlayStation 2, PS3, any computer with a USB port, other PSP systems, and the internet. Of course, the biggest draw was the games. Launch titles included games like Need for Speed Underground Rivals, Metal Gear Acid, and Spider-Man 2. Later games included God of War, Ghost of Sparta, Grand Theft Auto, Vice City Stories, and Daxter. The best-selling PSP game was Grand Theft Auto, Liberty City Stories, which sold over 7.6 million copies. Just like the home consoles, the handheld PSP was also given a makeover and put on a diet. The PSP 2000, released in 2007, was 33% lighter and 19% thinner. The disc loading trays, speakers, and D-pad were all rearranged, and a lighter, more energy-efficient battery was installed. Other upgrades included USB charging, increased memory, a brighter LCD screen, and the ability to play PSP games and other media on a TV screen, thanks to a new video output feature. The introduction of the PSP 3000, also known as the PSP Slim and Lite or the PSP Bright 1 year later, offered an even better LCD screen with twice the color gamut and 5 times the contrast ratio. An anti-reflective finish was added to reduce glare, and a microphone was installed so that people could video call using apps like Skype. By this time, Sony were beginning to see the downsides of using Universal Mini Discs, or the UMDs. Mainly that they were too expensive, and they were losing ground to Nintendo in the handheld market. So in 2009, they released the PSP Go, which did not require the per UMD and instead relied on downloads from the PlayStation Store. The design was streamlined to better fit into gamers' pockets. But a huge drawback was that the Go was not backwards compatible with the original PSP, meaning if you already owned a PSP but wanted to upgrade, you'd have to buy all of your favorite games again. Plus, the micro memory cards for the PSP Go were quite expensive, so even if gamers were paying a little bit less for the games themselves, they still ended up paying more overall if they needed extra space to store them on their device. As a result, the PSP Go was a complete failure when it hit the market. Sony's final noteworthy edition of the PSP came in 2011 when they released the E1000 model, also known as the PSP Street. Available only in the PAL region, it was basically just a budget, stripped-down version of the PSP. It had no Wi-Fi capability, no microphone, and a monaural speaker as opposed to stereo speakers. It was an okay option for casual gamers who didn't care about online play and didn't want to spend much on a handheld gaming device. In total, around 82 million PSPs were sold, making it the third best-selling handheld gaming device ever. But it was still outdone by the Nintendo DS family, which to date has sold more than 154 million handhelds. Going back to home consoles, 2006 saw the debut of Sony's PlayStation 3, and with it came the first real signs of trouble for the company.